And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D changes over time when we're not looking.
Hello, I'm Ange, and I'm an NPC in your story. Or maybe, if I'm lucky, I'm another PC. Either way, as an NPC, I serve as a resource and a voice of lady nerds in the TTRPG space. I write for Gnome Stew and run the Gnomecast.
I'm Jared, and I may have recovered enough cognitive ability to have a conversation that spans the entire length of a podcast. I have been told that in ages past, I wrote things for a blog called whatdoiknowjr.com and Gnome Stew. So if you go there, I've been told you may find my old thoughts captured in Internet Amber.
The internet is forever. After we look at the games we're running in the campaign journal, we'll be talking about how your campaign NPCs can change over time. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WD&D the Role Player. Now we're going to Mac McKinney and the Morning Game with Wolfman.
Random tables for determining the traits of NPCs go all the way back to the AD&D First Edition Dungeon Master's Guide. The facts table included things like alignment, possession, appearance, sanity, general tendencies, personality, interests, collections, and random tables.
Ugh, why so many things, Mac?
Because people liked having lots of options, made them feel like they could pick and choose like at a buffet.
You know, Mac, a buffet of people is a bit uncomfortable for me.
Yeah. So, you could have a neutral NPC with average wealth who is mature, neurotic, malevolent, friendly, and altruistic, collects books and scrolls, and speaks the language of stone giants.
Oh God, Mac, I can only think about how they would taste enlightened with a hint of spiciness.
Wolfman, you were really not helping with the awkward here, man.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mac. Well, why don't you tell me about what the DMG said next?
Sure thing. It doesn't say you need to use every table, just that you should have at least 3 general traits, and the DM is told to reroll any contradictory results. But is it really contradictory to be malevolent, friendly, and altruistic?
Sounds like they grabbed some passive aggressiveness from the buffet.
Okay, Wolfman, you're obviously hungry. Let's go get some lunch.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
This episode is being recorded not too long after the previous one I recorded with Chris. So I have only had the chance to play one game since then. Usually we've got about 2 weeks between recordings, but with the holidays, things got a little jumbled and all that.
Yeah.
So I did get to play and run the old Margrave. The last time we played was at least a month ago, so the players struggled a little bit with remembering where we'd left off. Jokes were made about increasingly further back time frames. We played before Thanksgiving. We played 6 months ago. Later in the session, when we were going over when they had last been in Zobek, I joined in the snark 3 years ago when you left Zobek. My players are smartasses. Anyway, we picked up with them kind of following along behind a massive tree ant that had a cabin in the upper branches. And they knew that the girl they were trying to protect had gone up in that tree. Now, as a note, sizes in D&D are sometimes not particularly helpful.
Especially at the high end.
Yeah, especially like rules is written, a tree ant is huge. That's just one step up from large and certainly not big enough to support a house. Rules-wise, we need to be careful about size, but story-wise, this was such a cool aspect of the scenario. I ended up adding some timey-wimey touches about it being bigger on the inside as far as the home in the tree went, but we definitely played it fast and loose with how big this tree ant was. I also did run into some frustration. Me and my players ran into frustration as I was trying to stick to the adventure as written, but my players were fixating on doing something that the adventure specifically blocked. Basically, they wanted to talk to the tree ant before trying to climb and enter the house. They wanted permission. Now, the adventure states, it has like 2 lines about this tree ant. It gives its name, and it's that he is very dumb and that he will not engage with the PCs at all. He'll just ignore them unless they attack, in which case he'll defend himself. And I'm like, that is incredibly unhelpful. when the players are trying to interact with the treant. I tried, like make an insight roll as you try and, engage with this creature. And because they were doing things like the druid was running out in front of it, trying to get its attention. And at first I was like, you're running out in front of the massive thing? This is like running out in front of an elephant to try and make it stop. And he's like, I'm not stopping. I'm not going to let it step on me. I get that, but what you're describing is not very wise.
Gonna flag down the train to see if it stops.
Yeah. And then the Nevrim, the warlock, tried using message to message it, but he only speaks common, and it very specifically said the treant does not speak common. Great. Thanks, designers. So I kind of had the treant look back and give him a weird look and just kind of a, huh? Like basically and I'm like, make an insight roll. Fails the insight roll. Okay. So then they're like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't speak common. Let's try Sylvan. But Nevrim doesn't speak Sylvan. So what they were doing is they were having Zartath come up with a phrase in Sylvan. Nevrim sounded out phonetically, and then Nevrim trying to send that. And like I was having them do like performance rolls to try and repeat what was said so that, all of that. And like they just, it wasn't coming across that the treant was dumb as a box of rocks and was not going to stop for them. So finally they're just like, screw it. They're going to climb the tree. And that's when we got into the cabin where they found Mama Bushka all alone, acting weird. And if you didn't know, this whole adventure is Red Riding themed. So it was very quickly revealed that that was actually the would-be King of Wolves hiding disguised as Mama Bushka. Fight ensues. It was a very tough fight because the king could do 3 attacks and like default damage was 18. If he could roll better, he could roll worse. Turvin was instantly dropped down to 2 hit points because he was the only one there in the room with the would-be king, revealed himself.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of the fight, Dahlia was down, Nevrim was down, Turvin still only had 2 hit points, Grish only had 9 hit points, and I think Mal might have had around 15 because Turvin kept healing him as they fought. Zartath was the smart one and stayed out of range and kept shooting range spells and was unharmed. Anyway, yay! Would-be King of Wolves is dead. The challenge is over for this cycle. Servonia, the young girl, will apprentice with Mama Bushka, and they all spent the night in the cabin in the branches of a tree. Then we got into some shopping fiddly bits because part of the reward of this was that Mama Bushka, who is an alchemist witch in the woods, rewarded them by giving them each a common and an uncommon potion and allowed the party to choose 2 rare potions. And so this led to probably about 45 minutes of, oh, I want this potion. Oh, I want this potion. Let's get this one as, like backwards. Let's.
Uh-huh.
I generally don't like shopping in games, but this seemed appropriate and they kind of enjoyed, like looking at the potions and trying to figure out what they could take. And I definitely broke my rule about sticking to Tales of the Valiant base book because I'm like, screw it. These potions sound fun. I'll let you take this one from Deep Magic or whatever other books that are out there in the list.
Oh, goodness.
Eventually, on the road back to Zobek, they stopped at Riven Sky Tavern to chat with their friends there, and they let Jonah Duskmace, the brewer and wife of the proprietor of the place, know that her friend in the village of Incot had died due to the Sanguine Path cult, but that her friend's child was safe in the village of Whedon. The players kind of confused Derevo, the child with powers, with Jonah's friend's child, but it really wasn't worth correcting them, and I think it's actually kind of cooler if Derevo is actually the one connected to the quest giver.
Also, there's just a lot of orphans in that campaign.
There's so many orphans. When they got the challenge of the Fang quest and they knew they had to kind of go protect Servonia, they're like, are we collecting children? This is kind of creepy. Anyway, they get back to Zobek and they were extremely concerned that the incident in Castle Stephanstor was going to cause problems for them. So the very first thing they did was go sneak up to a wanted board and see if their faces were on the wanted board. Nope, your faces are not on the wanted board. I actually had them roll investigation. Zartath rolled a 19, and I'm like, you're the smart one. You check the last week's worth of newspapers, and you find an obituary for Warden Valkest that, doesn't mention you guys at all, just says he died because of a bandit attack. Everyone's happy. Move on with your life.
He passed peacefully in his sleep after having rolled around on a knife a few times.
Anyway, I had some letters there for them, including a letter from the merchant that was selling the ageless honey for them. And basically we ended the session with them having gone to the merchant shop and discovering it ransacked and the merchant gone along with their gold.
Oh, no.
Dun, dun, dun. We will have some adventures in Zobek next time.
Not our gold. Oh, yeah, and the NPC.
I will give my players credit. They did not... They were more concerned with the NPC than their gold because they figure they'll get the gold eventually when they get the NPC.
So when you're talking about the language thing, when I was running Storm King's Thunder, I had a group that consisted of 4 people, and 2 of them were a husband and wife. The guy that was running the Goliath Paladin would not speak Common. Like, he decided he did not want to know Common. But he worked for the Lord's Alliance, which was interesting. 2 of the people in the party, the dwarf and the half-elf, could speak Giant, so they could speak with him. The Dragonborn, who was being played by his wife, could not speak Giant. Therefore, the 2 of them could never directly talk to each other. It was an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would allow a PC to not be able to speak Common, or at least not have all of the PCs speaking a common language.
Yeah.
It's one thing if it's like dealing with NPCs and all of that, but at the same time, I'm like, it is kind of a cool concept if it doesn't become annoying in play.
This was an interesting play culture thing that I found out about because most of these people had played in the Air Force with each other. So there was kind of an element of, can I do something weird with my character that nobody else picks up on? And I wasn't clued in on that, so I didn't quite check to see if there was something weird going on with the languages until after this became evident in play. So between me getting COVID and just generally having a hard time to get things up and running in January, I don't know if I actually remember what D&D is, so take everything I say with a grain of salt right now. That having been said, Ange asked me to outline how we were doing the Siege of Chimeras and how I was doing kind of that mass battle sort of thing that we did there, because she touched on it last time in the previous episode. So I knew we were going to have this major battle, and it was going to be about retaking a city. So I looked at a bunch of mass combat rules. I even started statting things up in 2 different mass combat things, and I wasn't happy with either one of them. And so I thought, what is the last thing that I was really satisfied with when it comes to mass combat? And honestly, it was the 3rd edition Heroes of Battle, which if you have never seen it, the resolution in there is that you have the players essentially being like special forces. They have a list of different scenes and things that they can do during the battle, and each one of those things is worth a certain number of victory points if they are successful. And also, you're supposed to kind of give them ad hoc victory points if they do something to the side that they throw in there, like, hey, this watchtower is over here. Can we burn this to the ground, and would that help? And you go, oh, sure, give me a skill check, and then you give them a few extra victory points in there. And then the way it's structured is you have, like, your side gets routed, your side gets defeated, there's a stalemate, you barely win, or you win decisively. And you set the different point totals for all of those things, and wherever the PCs end up by the time they run out of time to keep doing things, that's how the rest of the battle unfolds around them. And it does kind of make sense when you think about things like, oh, we snuck into the enemy general's camp and fought his bodyguards and killed their general. That is the kind of thing that would change the tide of battle, and it is the type of thing that doesn't make the GM run like a bunch of stat blocks or the PCs have to run extra people besides their own characters.
I liked how we'd get certain objectives, and if we chose certain ones of them, that would open up different objectives in the next section. Like we rescued the mayor, and that opened up a different path.
Yeah, that was the thing that I was looking at because, I mean, Heroes of Battle, I really like. That's one of my favorite 3rd edition books, but it doesn't specifically call out what I did, which was to say, okay, if this is a siege to retake a city, what are the steps in that? So I kind of determined that the first step was getting behind enemy lines for where they're staged outside of the city. Then the next phase is getting into the city. And then the final phase is actually retaking the city itself. So for each of those sections, I made a set of missions that they could do. And one of those missions, at least, is a mission you have to complete in order to go to the next phase. So, for example, in order to get into the city, you either have to figure out a way to break down the wall or sneak into the city. And beyond that, there's also additional optional things that you can do, but you probably should do some of those optional things because otherwise you may not get enough victory points to actually, make the final result go in your favor. But the other thing that I decided was I really didn't want to stat up like 35, 36 different potential encounters and then maybe use a third of them depending on what people actually decided to do. So the other thing that I did was I framed each of these missions as group skill checks, but then I used the multiple tier version of group skill checks that they had in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. So you have a complete failure, which is nobody gets any successes. If that happens, they don't get any victory points, and there's going to be some extra downside. For a lot of them, if there's combat involved, that downside might be you are bloodied now because you got out of this fight, but you got your rear ends handed to you. Failure just means you don't get any victory points. Success means you get half the victory points for the scenario, and then a total victories, you get all the victory points for that scenario. If you get a failure, then you can only do one more mission in that tier. So basically, if you haven't done the mission that lets you move into the next phase of the thing, you have to do that next or else you're just done. We've had middle ground things happen, but we haven't had complete failures happen so far. So
yeah,
I've had a lot of fun with this, but as Ange was saying, it's kind of like a flowchart. If you decided to attack one of the officers' camps and get battle plans, then once you're inside the city, one of the extra missions that you can do now that isn't open if you don't do that is to rescue the city official so that he can rally the people inside the town for you. I basically set that up there. There's a bunch of different branching things. Like if they would have, instead of going in through the city wall, if they would have like snuck around to the side and taken one of the islands out in the harbor, there's a whole separate set of things that could have happened with them coming in from that direction. It was a lot of fun setting up basically that flowchart. But the other thing is I didn't want everything to just be group skill check, then final boss. So there's like a few different branches that lead to a pivotal point in the fight. So what they had just done is they had scouted out the location where the dragon that is the general located in the city has her lair. Once they find that, they were going to signal their paladin ally, and he's going to fly in and challenge her and take her out. And what they have to do now is take out her elementals that are her bodyguards so that the paladin has a chance to challenge her directly. So that's one of those set pieces. There's a few other set pieces there depending on which direction they go. And then eventually, finally, all of this will channel into them trying to make Glavistus mad enough that they call out Glavistus and they get to fight her one-on-one. But based on their victory points, that's going to tell them what state the city is in when she shows up, and also potentially how many people she brings with her. So like, if this is a total victory, she may just show up by herself. If it's not a total victory, she might still have some troops with her that's going to complicate that final fight, because it's not just going to be her. It's going to be other surviving forces because they didn't completely trash everyone that's with her.
I think we were pretty good at our, pretty safe in our victory points. I know Kazina is a 14th level rogue. It is very hard for her to fumble any skill that she is trained in.
Yeah, since they're 14th level, that was the other thing. I was not shy on DCs. 30 is supposed to be the highest that you have as a DC in 5th edition. There are a few places where 30 is the DC for one of the skill options. Some people may not be able to hit it, and some people may be able to. So, I mean, I didn't shy away from throwing some really high DCs in there, even though we don't have everyone that's a rogue that can not get below a 20-something or whatever in some of their checks.
I did try varying up skills Kazina used, because Yes, I could roll a plus 17 where the lowest I can get on the die is a 10 for stealth every single time.
And I'm usually more open when we do like the group skill checks where I'll be like, if you can justify a skill to me, I will let you roll that. These I was a little bit more strict on, where I'm saying, okay, for this type of thing, these are the skills that make sense. And I didn't completely say you can't use anything else. I just said, if you use something else, I want you to justify it, and it's going to be a disadvantage. In most cases, somebody has one of those things that is a favored skill that would make sense for it. I was a little bit sad that the alchemist kit didn't work for blowing up part of the wall. I kind of wish that would have worked because I love that narrative. But yeah, that's how I have that set up. As Ange said, they have enough points now that it is impossible for them to be routed completely. And they're only a few points away from their worst result being a stalemate. They've got a pretty good amount of points going into this so far.
Hopefully it'll be good. Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon. So if you'd like to help us do the show and provide some additional content for you, we would love it if you would decide to support us. We regularly release supplementary content that will be awesome for your games, like the practical RPG table and session tips, Chris's Session 0 checklist that he developed as part of the Streets of Avalon playtest, alternate XP rules, ancestor feats, all sorts of things. Oh, we also have a Discord, and you don't even have to back us on the Patreon for that. Just come talk to us. We like talking to people. You can find our Patreon at www.patreon.com/Thac0WA.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
Campaigns are always more dynamic when you have interesting NPCs for your players to interact with. While we may never fully avoid describing generic NPC number 22 when our players turn down a street we don't expect them to explore, we can make our recurring NPCs into characters that the PCs remember and even enjoy interacting with. But when we have longer campaigns, do they still feel dynamic if they don't change? What we wanted to look at here today is how you have your NPCs change over time and if you should have some of your NPCs change. So, Ange, are there any NPCs we shouldn't worry about giving too many details to?
That's a trick question. Sometimes you put an NPC in front of your players and they don't care. It's an NPC you've put all this work into, all this detail in, and they're like, yeah, whatever. Tell me about this weird little guy sitting in the corner of the bar. And it's like some silly little NPC you described on the fly because you just wanted to give a little bit of flavor as they were asking questions you didn't expect them to ask. It's like, don't worry about fleshing out all your NPCs. What you want to do is make sure they have enough detail that you can basically play them as they need to be played in whatever purpose they serve in that adventure. If your players take an interest in them, lean into it and fill it out a little more. Just don't. It's another aspect of prep where you hear all these stories of GMs who put all this labor into prepping for something, and then the players turned right, and 90% of what they prepared is never touched again. The same thing can happen with your NPCs. If you put too much detail into an NPC before you realize that NPC is going to work and is liked by the players, or liked is not even the right term, the players are interested in,
Mm-hmm.
You got to find the right balance. You have enough information to be able to play it, and if the players are interested in it, you can explore it further.
Yeah, sometimes you are not going to know what people latch on to. I would say I am not going to, me personally, put a lot of effort into characters that are in certain roles that I know are just kind of, for lack of a better term, throwaway roles. Like, you're going to talk to a city bureaucrat about something. I'm not necessarily going to flesh them out until the PCs decide that they're really interested in how they fill out paperwork, and then you have to start kind of vamping on the fly there. But there are ways that you can kind of clue the players into the fact that this is a character that is here for a purpose. And that is it. They are basically a cardboard cutout.
I actually have a little bit of a problem with NPCs. I love making NPCs. And I I've learned to not pour too much into them, but I will make sure I have A, a visual, B, a name, C, an age, a job, an outlook, all these little details so that if the players take interest in that character, I can just slide into role-playing them without any problems.
I think that is probably the most important thing for a GM that wants to be prepared in case your players have decided to make an NPC into somebody that needs details, is to be ready with names.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like the most important thing to start going down that path of thinking of that NPC as a character.
Years ago, when I used to play Champions, the GM, if you'd ask him a name for a character he didn't expect to have to name, he'd freeze. And all of a sudden, that character would be named Fred. What was the other one? It was some sort of mob-style name, but it would just be like, okay, we now know that Dave had no idea who this character was until we asked him to name it, and now we know. And then the god-awful game that I started back gaming with and met some of my current gaming crew over 20 years ago, this GM would name every character Jim, Bob, Joe, or some combination of those three names. It was insulting.
I can see that. One of my favorite things was back on the Paizo forums, some of the designers pointed out that they really like taking a real world name, not one that's like too common, but just a real world name and changing a letter in it.
It's not a bad idea.
And then it's a fantasy name.
One of the other things I'll say about the detail you put into your NPCs is a word of caution. Know yourself and the types of things you default to when you're not prepared. Because if you play with the same people long enough, they will get tired of your tropes. There was a gentleman I played with who, in almost every game we played, there would be a rich, obnoxious asshole PC. It would be a different character every time, but he'd pull out the same trope every single time because, like, oh, that's an easy one for him to pull out and play.
Yeah.
It works a couple of times, but when you now have 6 different characters in the campaign who are all essentially the same person, they just have a different name, know your usual suspects and how to vary them up.
Definitely. I would also say, from that standpoint, think about how diverse your default NPCs are.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have definitely tried to make sure that I push myself into saying, okay, this character is a woman. This character is non-binary. This character is a man. So I'm not just always defaulting to one of those things, just to make sure that, you're portraying a world the way you would like a world to be portrayed.
I know, like, one of the things I've always suggested is, like, this is more for modern games, but if you need a beat cop, don't have it be an old Irish dude. We've seen that. That's been and done. Have it be a tough Latina chick.
Mm-hmm.
Just change it up enough that it's like the players still get what role that NPC is supposed to be playing, but it's now not the same old plug and play NPC that you've seen in a zillion different things before.
What types of NPCs benefit the most from having these additional details?
I think it's anything that PCs are going to be regularly interacting with, whether that is some aspect of the campaign that it's going to force them to interact with that character, or it's a character they've taken an interest in. So, for example, if you have an NPC that serves as a patron, employer, otherwise an authority figure that is regularly going to be in the characters' lives, you should probably have a fair amount of detail on that character and who they are, what their motivations are, so on and so forth. Also, if a PC brings an NPC to the game as part of their backstory, and they're going to be around and not just my distant father who I left behind in the old country, make sure you understand who that NPC is supposed to be, because even though the player created it, you're going to be playing it, so you should have more details so you get it right.
Yes.
I have been in situations before where I had a player mention they had a brother, and the brother was a captain of a ship. And I decided to have that character come in, and the player was not happy because that character was not the character he thought his brother should be. And I didn't have enough details to understand how that player expected his brother to be played.
Yeah, I was hoping, like, when I made a Nezek, when I fleshed her out, I knew that your whole family had been criminals and that your father had run cons before. And I knew that Kazina is not good at the charisma side of things, which is why I made a Nezek into a bard, because I figured someone in that group probably took after Dad a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't know that I ever explicitly said any of that, but I was kind of expecting her to be a sorcerer. Either way, still, charisma, not her dump stat.
Any NPC that they're going to visit more than once, you probably want to have something for them to actually cling on to there. I also think sometimes giving an NPC details helps you to stop from having the omni NPC. So, for example, like, once you specifically start talking about how the person they bought their silvered weapons from is this big burly woman that is scarred from working the forge, then you get this idea that, oh, we just get weapons here. We don't necessarily get everything that we can possibly get here. And then it starts making your world feel a little bit different, because then when they go to the potion seller, you can start giving details about the alchemist that they go to, and then you can start giving, details about the person that does provisioning for adventurers and for mercenaries. Then you start just having a collection of people that they know.
It basically helps fill out the world and makes the world feel more lived in. These characters are generally living in some sort of society, and there are going to be other people there, and giving those people names and faces and personalities helps make it feel a lot more lived in.
And the funny thing is, sometimes the detail that you can give to an NPC is giving them another NPC. And I say this because the fence that Kazina had in her backstory, I threw Ungrald, the alehouse Drake, in as her messenger.
Yep.
Basically, it was just to add a little bit more personality to this old woman that worked as a fence. So she has this alehouse Drake that looks like a sausage that begs food and drink off of people all the time and tends to get into trouble because he's a gossip.
I love him. My gossipy sausage roll.
I had a feeling he would connect, but I was glad that he did, because I liked having him show up once in a while just to be a goof. What kind of guidelines do we have in different games and in other products to help us flesh out our NPCs?
So right off the bat, I am obligated to mention that Gnome Stew put out a book called Masks. It is 1,000 memorable NPCs, 1,001 memorable NPCs. I did not participate in creating this book because they made it before I started writing for Gnome Stew, but it is still an absolutely fantastic resource that you can still get out there on, I think it's on Drive-Thru.
It was before our time.
Encoded Designs.
It was before our time, both of us.
Yes. Yes, but it is still an amazing resource because it's just a ton of NPCs. Like, I am stumped, like, flip it open and, like, I think there's 4 per, like, open page or something like that. It's a really good book.
Yeah, and they have, like, role-playing and appearance and personality and motivations and traits. It's not a ton, but it is substantial stuff that is in each one of those NPC entries to give you that starting point to jump into. There's a ton of resources out there for names, but I have noticed a lot more RPGs are just throwing names in there, especially like fantasy RPGs. Xanathar's Guide had a ton of potential names for NPCs in the back of it, but the 2024 DMG also now has some nameless, and some of them are human, some of them are elves, some of them are gnomes, so they have those on there where you can just look at those and go, okay, there's a name I need to use. The 2014 and 2024 DMG actually has a pretty good spread of, I don't like randomly rolling alignment. I don't even like using alignment, but it's in there if you want to randomly roll for that. But the other things that are better are like the personality and the appearance. And I like that they've kind of made secrets into one of the things that they do. And secrets isn't necessarily like a deep, dark thing, but it is something you just don't know about that NPC at first, but it is something that helps you frame what they are like.
The DMG also has a section on NPC roles, like comic relief, curmudgeon, so on. So you can basically, like, you know, if you're stuck for an NPC idea, you can look at that and be like, oh, yeah, I haven't given them a cranky old person in a while. Let's give them a curmudgeon.
Tales of the Valiant's Game Master's Guide actually has a really nice NPC section. I would actually say, regardless of technical game rules, I do kind of like their Game Master Guide a little bit more than the 2024, just because the 2024 DMG touches on a lot of topics very quickly, and they spend a little bit more time on a little bit less in the Game Master's Guide for Tales of the Valiant, which I think sometimes is a little bit better. What they have in there is like NPCs split up by like allies, antagonists, background NPCs, quest givers, and they actually have tables with examples of all of those things on there. Quest givers is actually really good too if you just don't have thoughts and you look through that list and see, oh, okay, that's what I could throw at them.
Yeah.
But the other thing I really like is they standardized their important NPC stat blocks. All of them have personality traits, bonds, flaws, and wants, which I really like that it has wants on there because that tells you what's driving that NPC. But the other thing that's kind of neat is those sample NPCs also have kind of a script. If the PCs ask this person about this, here are some things they will say about it. And then there's like a bullet point of different things that they will say, so that if you know why that NPC is part of your campaign, you can look at that and say, okay, these are the things that they'll be able to tell the PCs if they ask about these things.
Now, this is not the topic we're here to talk about, but I think that is an important thing to have on hand, because you can get a lot of flavor in your NPCs with changing how they talk.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they respond to questions without having to change your voice.
Yeah.
Just change up the slight cadence, the words used, all of that. And just giving yourself a note. This person never uses contractions. All of a sudden, that changes the way that NPC interacts with the players.
What's really funny to me is I looked at some heavier role-playing books, and they don't have as much on making NPCs as I thought they would. Like Daggerheart has a lot of principles, like show how the world reacts and make an NPC act in accordance with their motive. But then motive is really just a thing they put in an adversary stat block. They don't go into a lot about like talking how a normal day-to-day NPC should be structured, which surprised me a little bit. I mean, they do talk about story and things that are important for story beats, and some of that does touch on characters, but it's not specifically saying, hey, if you want to make this character stand out, you should do these things, which is really surprising considering some of the very standout NPCs that Matt has made over the years.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking like Essek and Pumat Sol and just, you know, Lord Essek and just like so many good NPCs.
First time I heard Pumat Sol, I about died. That was just hilarious.
I'm Pumat Sol. I'm also Pumat Sol.
Pumat Prime's not here today, but oh goodness. Dragonbane actually has a single page, but it does have a lot of different NPC traits in there. So it's got like their attitude and their motivation and their profession and a trait that goes along with them and names. So that's actually kind of a nice thing, especially for a more old school feeling RPG of all of these different things. But we could go on and on forever. I just wanted to touch on a few things that weren't strictly D&D to show you what might be out there to pull on some ideas for NPC creation there.
One last thing I'll mention, which is not an official game book, but the Fantasy Name Generator is a huge, absolutely wonderful resource because it breaks down names into all sorts of categories, and you can just like, I don't know, I guess this one, and then hit, you know, male, female, whatever, and then just get a random list of names. I very rarely take a name as written. I will take a first name here and a last name here, but I use that all the time.
When is a good time to make changes in NPC? That's really what we wanted to get into. How is this world looking dynamic, and how is that reflected by the lives that your NPCs are leading?
Do it when it makes sense. Basically, your NPCs do not exist in a vacuum. And if they have proved important enough to the PCs that the players are going to be interested into what is happening with that NPC, then you should consider what that NPC is doing when the PCs are not around. So if the NPCs have their own agendas, they have their own plans, they have their own lives, sometimes stuff is going to happen. And you should, I wouldn't do this all the time, but it's worth keeping in mind. Like, so for example, in the old Margrave game, the PCs have been gone for probably about 3 weeks, maybe close to a month, but they've been gone for a while. So what have the NPCs in Zobek been doing while they're gone, and has any of that been a change they will see? I think the closest I got to it is Zephona, their friend they rescued from Castle Steffenstor. She left them a letter at the Hedgehog Tavern and said she was going to Lavoka. It's not a major change, but she's still out there doing her thing. So it's important that they, know that their lives are still continuing on.
Yeah, we had a thing happen in our campaign where the paladins that the PCs were butting heads with went into the old temple district, which were all of the non-draconic gods, and they just started burning stuff down, which means all of the NPCs that I had connected to that district, I need to now think, how did this affect them? Now, granted, everything didn't burn down, but everything was burning and everything looked like it could have burned down and some places were damaged. So then you need to start thinking like, okay, did anybody leave? Did anybody go back home? Did anybody say, this is too much? Did anybody really step up and start rebuilding things? Those are the kind of things, like whenever there is a major event in your campaign, think about what NPCs it touches and what kind of questions they would have to ask themselves in that situation in how they move on from that major point that just happened.
Also consider the actions the PCs take that end up affecting the NPC directly. Your PCs will often try and help or hinder the NPCs based on their interactions with them and their relationships with them. Let those change things. The little girl Lila that they rescued from the Honey Queen, the Queen Bee, like she's now living with Mal and Grish's family on a farm. This has changed. She was also one of the letters that they received talking about she hates mucking stalls, but she likes the horses. And one of the cats had kittens, and one of the ginger kittens has taken a liking to her. But Nana says something about a familiar. I don't know what that means. So it's like, it's telling them that life is moving on with these characters, even when they're not around, but their actions have now affected these characters.
I think that's actually a really good point to drive home too, is that from real life, we should probably take the cue that young NPCs are going to change faster than older NPCs. When you introduce a young NPC, you are almost setting up that you are going to start telegraphing what does this character become once they are an adult. And that is a really good thing to keep in mind whenever you do introduce like those younger NPCs. Now, granted, if you introduce a 5-year-old, you don't want them to be a warlock by the time they're 7. But when you do have like that 10 or 12-year-old character and you check back in with them 6 months later, they are probably going to be pretty different than the last time you saw them.
Baldur's Gate 3, there are all those tiefling children.
Yeah.
And the little girl you pick up as soon as you arrive in Baldur's Gate. There's an entire section of fandom out there rooting for those characters to be the PCs in your next game. It's like they'd like stories of, which one becomes this, which one becomes that. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but like the little girl Withers talks to, well, she's obviously a sorcerer.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is pay attention to things that your players say about some of these NPCs, because sometimes when they say something offhand, like, man, they would be perfect for this other NPC that we met over here, that might be your clue to have like a romance develop in the background between those two NPCs.
Yeah.
I am always a fan of giving it like a cooldown timer. Like you note what your player said. You don't necessarily do it in the next session, but 2 or 3 sessions down the road, then you start having these things happen, which were exactly what they were kind of hoping happens with these NPCs. And then they become even more endeared to them.
I think it's important to state that the NPCs are one of your tools for helping the PCs engage with the world. And part of that is going to be those NPCs feeling like living, breathing characters. And that sometimes means things are going to change.
I will also, I'm going to throw this in here, even though this may not be the perfect place for this, but when you have long-term NPCs that are going to be quest givers, don't make them jerks. Like, I see that in adventures sometimes and I go, I don't know why my players would keep working for this person. Like, unless they really know that, like, 3 chapters down the line, the entire world is at stake. If it's just a matter of, okay, here's the 3rd job I'm giving you where I'm an asshole to you, don't do that. Like, I don't understand that.
I killed a campaign once because I pointed out that there was absolutely no reason for my character to continue helping the people of this town because every single person had been a jerk to us.
Mm-hmm.
And the other players are like, yeah, she's right. At which point one player had his character go off and murder the blacksmith for some reason. I don't know. It's just, it went chaotic and that was the end of the campaign. But it's like I had a talk with that GM because I'm like, dude, all of your NPCs are assholes. You need to, like, you know, he was trying to, like, you know, I don't know, make it interesting, you know, like have them not all be good people. But it was like he went the exact opposite direction. And there wasn't a single NPC we were willing to help by the time we'd gotten through our first quest in what was supposed to be a campaign.
I think people sometimes mistake the idea that friction does make something more interesting. Like, if you're just visiting somebody and they're always nice to you, no matter how many details you throw on that character, they may not actually feel like somebody you want to engage with. But friction doesn't need to be them being a jerk to you. It means they have something else going on that you want to, you know, crawl around inside and figure out.
One of my crowning achievements from my original Eberron campaign is I wanted to create an NPC that the players cared about because it was the Veterans of the Gauntlet campaign. They had all served together in the last war, and they were meeting together in Sharn for the 5th anniversary of the big battle where they kind of became a group. I start the campaign at the tavern of one of their former squad mates, a halfling named Redley Mugwinkle, who had lost his arm in the war. And they're all a little, not tense about him at first, but by the time we got through that first little arc where we did the flashback to them all becoming friends and then basically saving Redley's tavern from getting, you know, shaken down by a mob boss, they would give him crap all the time, but they would go out of their way to make sure he was safe because he was now their NPC. You know, that was one of my crowning achievements, to make a character that they would do that type of thing for.
One of the things that I've really liked in the Thrones and Bones adventures that I've been running is your patron most of the time ends up being Jarl Felbreer. I like him. Like, he is just a standard Norse Jarl that is a good, competent guy that likes to party when things go right. He's just kind of fun to play, and he's not a jerk.
He's a nice himbo.
Yeah. The other thing that I like is, this is something I wanted to touch on because we're talking about changing NPCs over time. He doesn't change a whole lot, but you do get to see different ones of his housecarls show up, which gives you like an expanding view of these people that work for him and why he needs you to do things for him sometimes too. Like, I actually kind of loved the complete idiot that was investigating the trolls in that one adventure.
How do I tell this man he's a moron without insulting him?
And even then, I like the idea that the guy was a complete moron. He did not have any thought in his head that he could be wrong, but he wasn't a jerk. He just was just so sure that he was right because he figured out, well, I know what's going on. You know, I enjoyed that a lot. So if we're going to introduce changes in our NPCs, when do we do that? When's a good time to do it? How's a good time to pull it off? Not just what we're doing, but how do we execute it?
So the change can completely happen off screen. It's something that you're just keeping track of in your notes. The trick is, how do you communicate that to the players when they engage with that NPC again? It could be something like a letter, like the ones I sent in the latest game. Gossip they hear from other folks around town. Basically, it's the next opportunity they have to engage with that NPC or that NPC circle of people. Think of how you learn about change among your friends. You know, how do you learn that your friend is having a baby? How do you learn that your friend's grandmother passed away? You talk to them, and eventually you hear about it from another friend. So it's like, think about how you would organically hear about change with another person in your life, and use some of those ideas for how you get this communicated with the NPC. It's also going to depend on what type of NPCs you're talking about. If it's your friend that runs the apothecary shop, you're probably going to find out when you go to the apothecary shop. If it is one of the lead counselors in the city that you're operating, you're probably going to hear about it as rumors or news that's being, shared throughout the city. So it really depends on, who that NPC is and how the players interact with them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of when you wrap up an adventure and you have downtime, you telegraph the change that's coming in one downtime. Then after the next adventure, when you have your next downtime, that's when you roll out the actual change after you telegraphed it. I personally like having Inezek get Harold to work for her as muscle on a job, and then later on, when you go to talk to Inezek, why is Harold there?
And Kazina is so obtuse. She's like, why is he here? Why does he smell like your perfume? And still not get it.
Yeah, and I just, that one's also fun because it is taking NPCs from different PCs and having them evolve together too, which I kind of enjoy because it's bringing the circle all together there.
Well, it makes sense because we have the main party, which is going off and doing things, and we have our friends who essentially equate to a side party of people that are doing other things together or in conjunction. So it's like, it makes sense that they'd start developing relationships with each other.
So what kind of NPC changes take away from a campaign?
Do not fridge the NPCs. Now, I know we've mentioned this before, and if you're listening to us, you probably understand what this means, but this is a reference to a thing that happened in comic books where they shoved one of the Green Lantern's girlfriends body into a fridge with her dead and him finding her, and it was all to motivate him to do things. Don't do that.
Poor Alex.
That's really bad. It's really cheap. It's don't just kill the NPCs that your players care about just to do it. It's like, yes, it's having them under threat and having them, be in danger. It's all part of the game and the story we're doing, but just don't do it indiscriminately. Remember that the NPC, the character that is the NPC, would have agency, and letting them just be a prop, that gets really problematic.
It does. I think what's really interesting too, though, is to understand that fridging is really just not letting that character have any agency and only existing to be that motivating factor because something terrible happened to them. And, I kind of want to spoil something, even though it's about 2 or 3 years in comics now. So, in the City of Bane storyline in Batman, Bane kills Alfred. He's been dead for years now. That did not feel like a fridging because Alfred has a life. It was a gut-wrenching thing because Bane killed Alfred. That puts Bane right up there with Joker from now on. He is always going to be a terrible person to deal with now. But it didn't feel like Alfred was just a throwaway character that you were doing something terrible to.
Right.
I'm still not saying you should do that very often with your NPCs that your PCs like, but it is an example of somebody that clearly has had agency, has clearly had storylines. There is a clear reason for them to be in danger, and you build up to that.
Right.
Alex, we knew in the Green Lantern comic for like 2 or 3 issues before Major Force shoved her into the fridge.
Yeah. She was literally there to be an object.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say is don't let your NPCs outshine the PCs. Even if they are super powerful, even if it makes sense with the way you've been evolving the NPC storyline, it's rarely enjoyed when the NPC shows up to do something better than the PCs can do.
Yeah.
Occasionally, it can make sense. Like, I did enjoy in Campaign 3 of Critical Role, the first time Keyleth shows up to help Bell's Hells. Like, that's a pretty cool moment. And yes, it is technically an NPC showing up and doing something better than the PCs can do. But the PCs needed the help. It was a cool throwback for the players. That type of stuff can be cool, but in general, don't let your NPCs outshine the players. And that's just the friendly ones.
The other thing I think is interesting about that appearance, and I will, since I already dropped like a gigantic spoiler for one media, I won't do this here, but the interesting thing about when Keyleth shows up is that's also a major cue to the current party. You are not ready to deal with this yet.
Mm-hmm. No, I remember a campaign long ago that a friend was running, and he was trying to show off some of the weird aspects of the world with some of these NPCs we were, ally NPCs we were dealing with. But the ally NPCs were so much more powerful than our characters were that it's like, why are we here doing any of this? Because Oprah, I don't even remember what the character's name was. We started calling her Oprah. Oprah could do 10 times what we can do. And the guy with the horse who can walk up walls, why are we here? We can't do any of that. And it made things very frustrating as a player.
Yeah, the other thing that I would say about NPC changes is there is a way that you can make an NPC that the players care about into a villain, but be real careful with that one.
Yes.
Especially if you end up having that person having always been a villain. That's almost the worst possible version of that.
Yes. I watched a campaign die in the second session because the GM took a friendly NPC that came from one of the other players' character's background and have that NPC betray us.
Oh, yeah.
And the GM didn't quite understand why we were so upset. To the GM, it made sense, that this character would do this. And we're like, one, the player never got to enjoy that character as a friend because we were only in the second session of the campaign. And it just took a couple of other things were in that situation as well. But ultimately, it was like, why did I create this NPC for you if you're immediately going to use it against me in this way?
I would go so far as to say, if you're going to pull the NPC, heel turn on your players, make sure you communicate a way back for that NPC instead of just having them eternally become their worst nemesis. I think that is a more fulfilling story than just having them turn into a villain.
Or the other option there is they telegraph some of this along the way.
Yeah.
You need to be careful because your players will be like, oh, that's a bad guy. You don't want to play them so evil that they're immediately obvious as a bad guy, but you can have the ally that betrays the party who was going to do it all along. You just have to do it very carefully. You just don't want to we talk a lot about, it's just a game. It's just a game. I shouldn't get upset if my character dies. Your players are going to get upset when the characters they care about do bad things to them.
Yeah.
Like that. Like if they have an NPC they like and they don't see that betrayal coming, or they don't see a way to pull that character back from betrayal, it can really bother the player. I'm not saying never do these things. You can do these things, It's just the same way you try and be very careful about PvP, you want to be careful about heel turns in your NPCs.
Yeah. So, speaking of horrible, terrible ways that you can develop your characters over time, what is flanderization and why might it be a bad thing for our long-term NPCs?
Quoting directly from TV tropes, the act of taking a single, often minor action or trait of a character within a work and exaggerating it more and more over time until it completely consumes the character. Most always, the trait action becomes completely outlandish and it becomes their defining characteristic, turning them into a caricature of their former selves. Sitcoms and sitcom characters are particularly susceptible to this, as are peripheral characters in shows with long runs. Hidely ho, neighbor.
Exactly. I think that last part is really important for campaigns, especially in shows with long runs. In campaigns that go on and on, there is a temptation that when your players latch on to something about that NPC, you always keep hitting that note with that NPC because you got a reaction from them.
Mm-hmm.
But that can't be the only note you're hitting with that NPC, because after a while, the players don't care anymore.
Yeah, you can have the NPC have a catchphrase or something that comes up. Like the other thing that popped into my head was Lenny and Squiggy sliding into Laverne and Shirley's apartment.
Yeah.
It's like those characters had more depth than that, but that's the only thing a lot of people are going to remember over long term. And with a long running show, sometimes you just fall back on those dumb tropes.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, as long as we're talking about Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, this is called flanderization. I would argue that Fonz is probably the first character that you really see this happen with, because he goes from he's really good at doing things that a greaser mechanic in the 60s would be able to do, to being really good at every possible thing that he does anywhere, all the time, everywhere.
See, they couldn't call it the Fonzieization because they already had jumping a shark from Fonzie.
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah.
Which comes from him literally jumping a shark.
Literally jumping a shark.
But yeah, there is that temptation. Like, once somebody likes something that you have presenting to them about an NPC, you pat yourself on the back and say, I'm going to keep doing this all over again. Do it once in a while, but be careful.
Yeah.
Don't make one thing the only thing about your character. One of the things that I did with your Ambassador Kobold friend, like, I did the whole ridiculous, he pulls out the stepladder to talk to people, so he's looking at them, face to face. He's got the wide brimmed hat with the with the big feather in it. But over time, I did have a few situations where I showed he's actually a really good diplomat. He really has a lot of contacts. And then I had the whole arc where he got kidnapped and replaced. And he has this very serious conversation with Marin about, like, I don't know that you're prepared for what she wants you to do. And all of that was to show that he has more depth than just being kind of this comedic kobold that brings you your missions.
You knew it was serious because rather than standing on his stepladder, he just sat down and was like, my dudes, I don't know if you're ready for this.
Yeah. Which, honestly, that's actually a good point. Like, sometimes not doing the thing that you have established they do all the time is how you make a point.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at all of this taken together, what should we keep in mind about our long-term NPCs when we think about our campaigns and developing them?
I would say, most importantly, the NPCs serve the game. They are characters that are living in a world that help the other players understand the world their characters are living in. You want to make sure that the NPCs aren't going to overshadow the player characters, but that they are part of this world and you can use them to basically show off more of the world.
I think it's important to, make sure you're detailing the characters that your PCs are spending a lot of time with, especially when you want to make their role in the campaign evident. Try not to change more than one NPC at a time when you're changing people over time, unless those NPCs are linked. If they're family members, then yeah, maybe you're doing a major change for more than one person, but don't overwhelm your players with all of this background stuff, because then the story starts to not look like it's about them.
I would also say don't change just for the sake of changing.
Right.
The change should serve a purpose that, maybe that purpose is showing the PCs the consequences of their actions, that their actions have consequences, good and bad, to show changing aspects of the world, to show the pressure that's coming from whatever threat is in the game. These things are things that are going to be affecting the NPCs as well, but don't change the NPCs just for the sake of changing. To follow up on what you were saying about trying to give the players exposition about the lore of this NPC, that's sometimes your players don't care.
Yeah.
Some players may pick up on it, but you never want to go into so much detail about an NPC that you've put all this work into it, and the players are just getting the top 3% of the work you've put into it.
Just because you mentioned that, though, I do have to laugh, because I've seen that happen, especially on Critical Role a few times, where one or two players are invested in the NPC and the other players haven't picked up on it. And then out of the blue, one of the other players will be like, when did that happen? That happened 2 sessions ago. I didn't even notice that. I would also say, try to telegraph things so that it does feel like the world is changing, not just abruptly getting retconned.
Mm-hmm.
We already said this. If you do the heel turn, be real careful. And, if they really love that NPC, maybe don't make that heel turn a permanent thing that they can't come back from.
I will say we didn't spend as much time talking about adversary NPCs, because they are also NPCs in the world that should be changing. It's just in D&D style games, if an NPC is an adversary, they often don't live to see the next day after the last time the players saw them. But if you do have a recurring villain, you want to make sure that you're doing some of this stuff with them as well.
I'd also like to say, if you haven't watched it yet, there is a character that is very obviously set up to be a recurring villain in Cloudward Ho for Dimension 20. And it is very funny how Brennan handles his exit when they first run into him. They completely lampshade this whole, that's not fair that you escaped. It's almost like you're going to come back later and be a thorn in our side.
I had an incident in that Veterans of the Gauntlet Eberron campaign where during the flashback, when they were first level characters doing their first mission together, the NPC they were fighting, I wanted her to be the recurring villain. And they defeated her before she had a chance to get away. And I had this devastated expression on my face. And one of my players looked at me, he's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I kind of wanted her to get away. And he's like, well, we're soldiers. We're not murder hobos. We captured her. Maybe she escapes later. And I'm like, oh, thank you for that lifesaver. Because I had so many ideas for her as a recurring villain, but she was too close to the PCs in that first fight. So I was like, oh no, what do I do? How do I have her be a recurring villain when they just defeated her? We didn't really retcon things. We just explained that they handed her over to the army where she became a prisoner of war and then later escaped.
I will say we didn't quite touch on this, but don't make changes to an NPC that expressly go against things you talked about in Session 0. That Session 0 is like a trust exercise. If your player created this NPC or contributed to this NPC and they said certain things about that NPC, don't erase those things. Don't make it to where, oh, you thought that was true, but it really wasn't.
Yeah.
Respect the work that you did in Session 0.
I will also say, in relation to NPCs created by the player characters, drastic changes should probably be run, not necessarily run by the player, but it should be telegraphed enough that it's not something they're upset with or taken aback by when it happens.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's great to have your NPCs change over time. Just do it with intentionality, which is kind of like my recurring thing about everything that you're doing in your campaign.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research.
where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to you, our listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will be always something we think will enhance your D&D experience. So, I have been a nerd my entire life, but I grew up in a family that loves football. I generally don't care, but about 10 years ago, I agreed to play fantasy football. My dad and brother thought it might make me start to want to watch football and get into it. I just thought it would be fun to play it well without caring. And I've actually won, the leagues a couple of different times over the years. It's glorious to win and not care about football. But football is something that is very important in the grand scheme of my family. And anyway, with the Super Bowl rapidly approaching, it is worth sharing a delightful actual play that combines the two. 6 defense players of the Kansas City Chiefs sat down with its Anna Margaret and played a D&D game. It's super fun to prove that our beloved hobby can be loved by everyone, even a bunch of football jocks. We'll have a link in the show notes. It's called Dungeons and Defense.
I have a thing that is both timely and ancient at the same time. So Pillars of Eternity has been out for 10 years at this point. It had a direct sequel in 2018, and then it spawned a whole new franchise last year with Avowed. Why am I talking about this 10-year-old game at this point when there's other games in the series much newer? Because they introduced a public beta for a turn-based mode last month, and I really like it, and it got me to playing Pillars of Eternity again. Playing Solasta and Baldur's Gate 3 really got me into that idea that I like the game slowing me down into that turn-based mode so that I can actually savor the idea of triggering a certain type of attack or making sure that I place a spell in the exact right place. And as much as I love the old, Baldur's Gate style games, that real-time movement could sometimes it made it to where you tried to do too many things on autopilot and you didn't always appreciate that fireball going off and blowing up half the people in that mob that you targeted.
I had to stop playing Neverwinter Nights 2 after they did the upgraded revamp of it last year because I couldn't play turn-based.
Mm-hmm.
I kept dropping fireballs on areas with nobody in it because I'd set up the fireball and then all of the bad guys would run towards the PCs. And it's like, that's not any fun.
Yeah. And especially in Pillars of Eternity, there's a lot of spells that are intentionally delayed. Like you cast them on your turn, but they don't go off until a few turns later. And if you're doing that in real time mode, a lot of times those things just never hit.
Mm-hmm.
They never go off when they're supposed to. I have been loving this. The main thing I will say, it is still a beta. You will still have things happen, like a monster that wasn't considered part of the initiative will just wander in real time. You'll be sitting there going, okay, we're going to attack this thing at range, and initiative triggers. And then this monster that was just off screen that wasn't part of the initiative walks right up into your face, and then once it gets in your face, it was like, oh wait, let's roll initiative for this thing. I mean, it's almost like an extra wandering in onto the set when it happens. But so far, I've played it for several hours since they did this, and it's been a lot of fun. If you ever liked Pillars of Eternity, but you didn't finish it, maybe now is a good time to do that. You do have to enable the public beta client on Steam. It's not just an automatic, but hopefully eventually it's going to be just a normal mode that you can turn on in the base game. I'm enjoying it. I appreciate that they are still paying attention to a 10-year-old game and doing little tweaks to it to see what they can get it to do. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out. We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
The Heroes of Havel's Way. It's an epic fantasy story about 2 young heroes, Odie and Aramon. These heroes have the potential to deal with the dire threat from an ancient time that is poised to return to the world. A Titan destroyer, Valhelmorse, the Mountain Strangler, stirs. The fate of the barony of Castican may be in their hands. We play the game to find out, and we invite you to join us on our journey.
Sounds familiar.
It does. We need to poke Chris.
We've used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you'll go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.